Hello, and welcome back to Laurence plays Factorio Planetary Pioneers, and we're back on Vulcanus, at least briefly. In the last video I talked a bit about how we're building up all of the large Vulcanian machines, that's the big crushers, the big drills and the foundries, and like most big special machines you get the boost of a plus 50% productivity just for using one of these machines, which is fantastic. But as you can see here, they can only be created when there's a really high atmospheric pressure, which functionally means they can only be made on Vulcanus. And also they require molten iron, which is and tungsten, and both of those are a bit of a faff to get on other planets. So they're great because you get the plus 50% productivity boost. Similarly with the big mining drills, it's not called a productivity boost here, but it's a resource drain of 50%, which means you end up using up less of the resource that's in the ground in order to produce the ores or whatever it is they dig up. So that's a massive advantage. And the foundries also give you that base productivity boost of 50%, which again, absolutely fantastic. As well as allowing you to do various other exciting things like melting metals and casting things directly from those molten metals and so on, which is again really useful because it allows you to use better recipes as well as getting the boost in productivity. And once again, it can only be made on Vulcanus. Notably, the big mining drill also gets an improvement on that resource drain with increased quality. And so despite what I said in the last video about not being sure where these were going to be useful, this is going to be a fantastic reason to use these on any planets for any resources we're struggling with. So potentially we should be putting them out here on any of the smaller tungsten patches that we don't want to run out. But we do seem to have decent amounts of tungsten available to us at the moment, and absolutely huge amounts of calcite, so it doesn't feel quite as necessary to use them out here. But so yes, we have to make these buildings on this planet, but we can then ship them out to other planets, and we've been starting to do that a little bit. The first example of these is on Lignumis, where I asked Mark to go over and improve and modernise the gold processing system that we had set up over here. So previously we had the gold stromatolites being grown over here and harvested and then passed out along the belts over here, as you can see. We've got plenty of gold ore, plenty of the moist stromatolite remnants and so on. And that was then previously being dealt with over here in burner crushers and stone furnaces, because it was all very old tech from when we'd first been on Lignumis and we hadn't upgraded it. So Mark has now been in and he swapped out. This area was basically full of tangles of spaghetti and general awfulness, and with the more modern and therefore more compact machines, so yes, okay, the machines are bigger but they run enough faster that per square they produce significantly more output. So he's been able to then cram in 3 big crushers along here, which is getting us that 50% productivity I mentioned, and we've got another 30% coming from somewhere. That must be from researchers, and that's allowing us to make lots and lots of crushed gold, which can then be fed out here. And unfortunately, melting metals requires a certain amount of calcite, so that's another thing that's having to be brought in from Vulcanus and is being dropped into the landing pad over here and then brought over by belt. So it works, but it's a slightly awkward having to bring it over, but you know, never mind. That then makes the molten gold, which can then be set into gold plates, and we've got a nice healthy supply of gold coming through here. This is then allowing us to make the steam science and the blue circuits and so on and so on. So this is all working generally very well, I'd say. The moist stromatolite remnants are then passed down here to these desiccation furnaces, which pull out all of the water and turn it into steam, which then goes off down here to be made into the steam science packs. I have some minor concerns over the quantity of steam being produced here, whether we're going to have enough to make all of the steam science and the blue circuits that we're trying to make, but we'll see how it goes. Hopefully this will be enough. And then these machines also produce a certain amount of peat as an output, which can then be passed down the belts over here, and some of it fed by priority, presumably, oh no, not even by priority because it doesn't matter, but that can then be fed back up and around here to be used as fuel by the furnaces, so they are sort of self-refueling. And any excess can be fed off down here where it'll flow down this belt and then be passed up into the main system along here to be taken away and used for the plastic production. So this is all working quite nicely. I believe this area at least is peat positive. I don't know about the rest of it. I'm assuming it's going to be slightly peat negative and that we're going to be using up some of the peat from the mines around wherever our peat mines are these days. Here's one. But at some point perhaps we'll ship over some of the large mining drills, maybe even some of the high quality ones, and get that updated as well. In fact, I think that's the thing we probably should do, because I do worry a little bit about the amount of peat available on this planet. There's nearly 100,000 here, 167,000 here. There's a couple more chunks of it under here, but this is underneath the area where we're producing the wood juice, so ideally we don't really want to go in and dig that up, although we could do. It would be possible. We would just have to move this off somewhere else. There's a patch up here with 337,000. That's quite a good one, and if we stick the big drills on that so we can get out 800,000, maybe even 1 million out of it, that's going to do us pretty well and keep us going for a long time on this planet. So I think we should be okay. But I do like the idea of coming out here with bigger drills to get the increased productivity and allow us to get a lot more peat out of these patches. Similar systems have been installed on Nauvis as well. So in this example, we've got crushed copper coming in over here. It's being brought into the foundries along here, which are in theory melting it down into molten copper. Unfortunately, we've run out of calcite. We need to bring more of that in. We'll have a look at how that's being brought in a moment. But then that can be pumped through. We can make that into copper plates, which can then be passed down and taken away to be made into circuits. We're also feeding the molten copper away over to this station over here, which has a quantity of it. And so that's going to be we're going to be able to take that away as well. And then potentially when we do more upgrades, we can then turn that directly into the copper cables to make circuits. But let's check the maths on whether this is actually more efficient. So 20 molten copper becomes 2 hot copper plates. So that means 10 molten copper becomes 1 copper plate. Then 1 copper plate becomes 2 copper cable. So 5 molten copper makes 1 copper cable. If we make them directly from molten copper, however, 5 molten copper makes 2 hot electrical cables, but they cool into 2 cold electrical cables. So this means that if we go directly from molten copper into the cables and then feed those into an assembly machine in order to then make the circuits, we're going to be using half as much copper. So that's definitely going to be valuable and a very good way of doing it. So I think we'll want to be implementing that. That's another upgrade that we still have yet to do. At the moment, the green circuits, for example, are still being made out of, you can see the copper plates coming in here, being made into copper cable, being made into green circuits. So there's some easy upgrades in there that we'll probably pick up in the next stream. In theory, the calcite is all being dropped into this landing pad here down on Nauvis, where we're asking for, yes, the science packs, and then also the various requests that Nauvis would like. So we would like to have some foundries, we'd like to have some big crushers, we'd like to have big mining drills, we'd like to have some tungsten, we'd like to have some calcite, we'd like to have some silicon. And at the moment, of all of those, we seem to have enough crushers and we seem to have enough silicon, but we don't have enough of any of the others. The Richard Dean Anderson is on its way back over from Vulcanus at the moment, and there's going to have a load of supplies in it. Unfortunately, we don't seem to have any of those ones that we want in here. We've only got the tungsten carbide, which we're not even requesting on Nauvis, so that explains why there's still some in there, I suppose. But this entirely comes down to the lack of rocket fuel coming through here, which, as I explained in the previous video, is due to the lack of balancing on the oil byproducts. So once we get a supply of rocket fuel coming through here, we should then be okay. We'll be able to ship up large quantities of the calcite from over here, the tungsten from over here, and the various machines and the buildings from here, and get all of that back over to Nauvis and get it properly supplied. And that's going to be quite an easy fix. As I was saying earlier, all it requires is perhaps an additional system like this one for making solid fuel that only gets turned on when there's a shortage of light oil. And so that all drops in here, and then we've got some clever inserter magic going on around the edges. So the ones at the top are set up to take out the science packs that are required, and that's done by using the system up here where we say we would like to have 40,000 of every science pack, and that's on a constant combinator. We then feed that into an arithmetic combinator, which takes all of those inputs on the green cable and then subtracts the red numbers for each of those. So, for example, we take the 40,000 grey science that we require and subtract the 32,000 grey science that we have, and that means we output, 7.1 thousand. There's a bit of rounding going on in there, and the same for all of the other ones. You can see through here we've got this is how much we're short of what we would like to have. That signal then gets passed down here into this decider combinator, where we combine on the red cable what we would like to have if it's greater than 0. So in the case of orange science, we would like to have another 39,000 orange sciences, please. And then we combine that with whatever we've got on the green cable, and that's what's in the actual landing pad itself. So here we've got 520 orange sciences. So both of those numbers are greater than 0, and so they get passed through onto the output over here. And now we've also got steam and space sciences on there as well. And so that means that's then passed through this selector combinator, and this picks a random input to feed through to the output and changes it every 105 ticks. So if we watch here, you can see that every so often, every second and a half or so, it's changing between different science packs. So it's gone to space science, and now it's gone to steam science. Now it's gone back to space science again, and there we go to orange science. And the idea of this is we feed that over to the inserters here, and that means we'll get a variety of different science packs being passed out and flowing up here. So we get a random stream of all the different science packs that we're a bit short of. They're passed up through here, and then they go into the sortimetrons and are fed into the chests. And the reason we're doing this with the randomization is in theory to stop this happening, where we end up with so many of one particular science pack coming through that it jams the system up. And we want to avoid that happening if we possibly can. And so looking at this, I think perhaps the randomization is a bit too infrequent, so maybe we should come in here and change this to 40, and then we'll see the science packs on here change a bit more often. We'll get slightly more shuffling going on as they come through here, and maybe that will allow them to flow through a bit more evenly and not clog up quite so much. We do have a priority set up on this splitter though, and that makes sure that the any science packs coming in from the sushi belt system get priority to flow in, so hopefully it won't clog up too much and it won't cause any problems on the sushi belt. We then have a very similar system running on the other output to the landing pad, the one that comes out this way. In this case, we have a storage system down here, which is fairly similar. We've got some filter inserters along here, loading up various things into the boxes down here, and then we're counting everything in those boxes and feeding it up across here and in over here. This works in the same sort of way. We say we'd like to have 2,000 of each of these out there, and we take the contents of those chests, multiply it by -1, and feed it in over here. So over here, we see the additional amount that we would like to have in the system. At the moment, that's tungsten plate and calcite. The rest of these are LTN signals, or we have too many silicon cells over there, but that's fine. We don't mind if they're a little bit over. And then we have the contents of the landing pad shown over here, and once again, in the same way as before, anything that appears on both sides will appear over here, and therefore these inserters will unload it onto the belt here, where it'll be taken over and loaded into these chests over here. The combinators down here attempt to load each one of these chests with a 1/16 of the total amount that's meant to come into it, and that means we should have a good spread of all the different resources in the chests across here. Then when a train comes in asking for any one of those things, whether it's calcite or silicon, tungsten, etc., we then have circuitry over here that triggers from the requests of the train, pass it through some circuitry over here to make sure the correct amount goes out, and then feeds those signals onto all of these inserters over here, which ensures that the correct amount to fill the train up will be passed out through and load it up. We also have some other inserters over here that are using blacklists to unload anything that gets in a train that shouldn't have, because we're probably going to end up with a little bit of overspill. And that again gets passed around and goes into the system over here for recycling, just to pass it around and make sure it gets reused sensibly. And so this means we're able to bring in lots of different resources over here, feed them into a station down here which has quite a lot of storage space due to having all of these chests, and then when a train arrives we can feed just the resources that are required through to that train, allowing the train to fill up with what it needs, perhaps it's calcite, perhaps it's tungsten, and take it away to where it's used. And this would work really well if we had a bit more of the input stuff coming in, but you know, we'll see it working another time, I'm sure. There is, however, one more complication with bringing stuff down from space the way I've described. So, because cargo landing pads work as provider chests as well, we could, in theory, make all of these machines available directly to the Roboport network, allowing the bots to pick them up from there and take them away to anywhere where we wanted to build with them. However, that would also make all of the other resources in there available to the Roboport network, which would mean that then the robots would try and fly tungsten from here down to the mall, which is also on the Roboport system, and he's trying to use a certain amount of tungsten, causing an enormous amount of bot effort to be wasted transporting stuff from up here down to here. So we've already got trains set up that can transport the tungsten around like that for us, which is much better, and so we want to make sure that everything is brought down here by train instead of by bot. In order to make that work, we've had to disconnect the landing pad from the Roboport network. So you'll see there's a big green area in the middle here, so the landing pad isn't on the orange logistics network, and that means the bots won't pick anything up from there. However, I just said that it's quite handy having all of the big machines that we're bringing in from Vulcanus available in this landing pad so that the bots can take them away and use them for builds like the one we looked at earlier with the copper. So in order to get around that, we have an additional chest over here, a purple chest, which is on the end of a belt which comes from here. So we're monitoring what's on the logistics network from the Roboport over here, feeding that along this green cable, and then once again we've got a thing here that says we would like to have 10 of each of these things available all the time, and then those things are being fed through to here. If there's ever a shortage of those particular things on the Roboport network, and there's some in here, we can feed them over to the outputs, and then they'll be passed off down here, where they'll get picked up by bots and brought over to the main storage areas on the mall, which is down here somewhere. So they'll then get dropped into these yellow storage chests, which means they'll then be available for the bots to use for any builds we need. So we've got some large drills here. We've got 60 large drills, we've got 15 foundries, and we've got 39 large crushers. And you'll notice these are larger numbers than the 10 I described before. So this system does have quite a bit of overflow on it, because any machines that are being carried around by bots don't get counted. So what this functionally means is that whenever we run out, or rather whenever we dip below 10 over here, all of the big machines that are in the landing pad over here will be dumped out at once, and will all go over into this purple chest and will be shipped over. Then, the next time the Vulcanus ship comes over, it will then drop down another 100 of each, in theory, assuming it's got them. And then when the system runs out again, those 100 will be dumped over into the logistics system. It's not quite perfect, but to be honest, it means the system goes burstily rather than dribbling them out one at a time, which in a way is kind of better. It means you've got a bit more buffer available in various places. I think it's absolutely fine the way it is, but that's why we have more than the specific 10 we're asking for over here. This is a minimum rather than a target. I mentioned earlier that the maul area requires some tungsten, and yes, it does indeed. That's required for artillery shells. Yes, we've started making artillery shells now, which is absolutely fantastic. These are being made here on the maul along with artillery cannons and artillery wagons, and then being carried over by bot to be dropped off over here, where they can then be loaded into our 2 shiny artillery trains. These are set up quite cleverly just using interrupts. You'll see here we have 2 interrupts available, a refill and a go off and kill the biters one. Very eloquently named there. The refill one monitors for when the train has a shortage of cargo inventory, which means it's run out of shells, or when there's fewer than 2 nuclear fuel cells left in the locomotive. If either of those trigger, it will then be told to go to the restock area, where it'll trundle over here, and it'll wait there until it gets a full cargo inventory and all the locomotives are fully fueled. So it's then going to sit there, it's now waiting, we've got the fuel here and available, the train is fully fueled, but we don't have any shells available at the moment, so we're not reloading the train, which is why it's still sat here. And then once those are satisfied, it will head off and do something else. The other interrupt says if there is any cargo in the inventory, which there must be if the train is leaving here, because it will only leave here when it's full, but also if there's any artillery shells left when it leaves another artillery station, there will still be cargo in the inventory, in which case it will go to a wall artillery station, and it will wait there until it's had 5 seconds of inactivity, which basically means until it stops shooting, either because it's run out of ammunition or because there aren't any biters left within range. Let's trigger this one to go manually and see how the system works. So we're heading off to a wall artillery station, and there's a number of these all the way around the perimeter of the factory, allowing us to have good coverage of all of the biters. Once we get out there, we'll take a look at how they work and how we make sure the trains are reasonably sensible about where they go to. And here we are, here's one of the stations. So the train pulls up here, and you can see the artillery cannons have immediately deployed and have started shelling some nearby biters, who are, of course, then going to get a little bit upset, come running in and attack us. But never mind, we've got some defences over here that should be able to cope. The interesting part over here is these combinators. So the station is reading out the stop train's ID. Functionally, that is telling us when there is a train in the station. It's telling us that currently train 641 is in the station. That's fed down to this counter here, which says when there is no train in the station, so when the ID is equal to 0, then pass through the input conditions or the P input conditions. This means that whenever there is not a train here, and let's tell this one to go away to demonstrate, whenever there isn't a train here, you can see that P is starting to count upwards. So this is a simple counter. This P signal is then divided by 3600 to turn it into minutes instead of ticks, and then fed back up to the station here, where it's used to set the priority. So the priority of the station is currently 0, in a minute it'll be a priority of 1, in 2 minutes it'll be priority 2, and so on. So the priority of the station gradually increases. Oh look, the biters have come in to say hello. Let's ignore them for now. If I go off and find another one of these stations, one that hasn't had a train for a bit longer, I can look in here and I can see the priority has got to 16. So that means it's been 16 minutes since a train has come out to this station. And so next time a train departs, this one will have a higher priority, so the artillery train will come to this station before it comes to the one we were just looking at. The next one down the trail is 20 minutes, then 27 minutes, and so on all the way around. So this means that when an artillery train leaves the reload area, it will go out to the station that has been waiting the longest to have an artillery train. In previous games, I've managed to do my prioritisation by having trains go out to an area when it runs out of ammunition, which kind of works as long as each station has its own separate ammunition feed, which we don't have here, and as long as you're using bullet weapons rather than laser turrets. This is mostly laser turret managed down here and flame turrets, so you don't have quite the same level of information telling you when an area has had some sort of excitement, shall we say. And unfortunately, you can't read activity levels from a turret, so you can't trigger a station when any of the nearby turrets have had to do something recently. So given that, I think Mark has come up with a good solution here. This is going to allow the artillery train to defend the entire factory, and it's going to spend a lot of time bimbling around, going out to areas to check whether anything is needed there, but it should keep the area quite safe without too much difficulty. Mark has also expanded the city block system quite a lot. I think he's put in at least 1, maybe 2 more rows across the bottom here, and he's certainly put in a row across the top, so it's gradually expanding every time I look at it feels like. But this is a good thing, because it means there's lots of space out there, so when we want to come in to produce our new and improved circuit production facilities, where the cables are made by foundries instead of assembly machines, and maybe an improved cog production facility that's going directly from molten iron, and so on, there's always going to be plenty of space out there to go and build in. And I think this video has shown one of the interesting things about Factorio Space Age and sort of Planetary Pioneers, but with it being an extension of Space Age, is that when you unlock some exciting new machines on another planet, like we did on Vulcanus, you then suddenly realise that there are lots of upgrades available on all of your other planets, so you can go out and do some improvements over there. We didn't get quite the same sort of thing from Maluna, but we did get the ability to then go head further out into space because we've got a load of important crushing researchers and things there, and the ability to deal with asteroids. So we did certainly get something from that planet, even if it didn't have to then be brought back here. However, Maluna is going to be affected in the opposite direction, in that it might now be interesting to come over here and rebuild some of this area with the big crushers in order to allow us to get that 50% productivity bonus out of the inputs. It will be a fairly significant rebuild in order to do so, but that's not too much of a problem, especially given how much faster the big crushers are compared to the small ones. So as you can see, there is always going to be plenty to do. Each time we unlock a new planet's secrets, we're then going to want to go up back to the old planets and upgrade them, and we're trying very hard to fight off the excitement of going off to the new and shiny planets and get some of those upgrades done. And as you can see, there's still a bit more needs to be done on Nauvis before we really start to concentrate on Icarus. But that's going to come in a future video. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this interesting, and it's been good to see how we're bringing in all of the products from Vulcanus and helping to upgrade other planets. There'll be more videos coming out every Thursday and Friday for the foreseeable future. We'll be carrying on streaming Planetary Pioneers on Mondays, and I'll be playing some Foundry on Wednesdays as well, which is a lot like Factorio, but with a third dimension to play with. If you'd like to have a go at Planetary Pioneers, there is a mod available on the Factorio mod portal called Planetary Pioneers, funnily enough, that will allow you to clone all of our mod settings and play along with the same sort of challenges we've been having. So check that out if you're interested. Come along to the next stream. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.